Welcome back to Retrieving Sanity with your podcast host, Keegan, and today we have a very special guest. He is a person in recovery and a recovery therapist. His name is Blake Hunt. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
So, how are you doing today?
Yeah, today's been a crazy day. So, man, I started off good. Fridays are usually pretty tame at the treatment center, and then we had one person leave. We had two clients fight, and I'm just sort of like enjoying my break from that. So we got through it all. The day is over. The weekend's coming, but it was an exciting day. Yeah.
Well, I mean, an exciting day is always better than, well, a boring day, right?
Yeah.
So
that's what I asked for when I got into this line of work, you know? So.
Well, that's fair. And in that line of work, there's all sorts of turbulences and things that go haywire because, well, you're kind of in recovery yourself. You're dealing with people that are getting into recovery, and you're just dealing with life, and you're still a human being. So
yeah, it's kind of a constant reminder of, you know, where my life was at when I first entered recovery, you know, and I think what's helpful about that is it allows me to like approach most situations with empathy. But they're also a mirror, you know, and so I'm like, God, was I really like that? And I was, so yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Those mirror aspects are always a little scary and a little daunting because it's like, man, I didn't want that. I spotted, I got it.
Yeah,
damn.
I know. My least favorite saying of all time.
Oh, I know, right? Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get into this line of work, and how did you find yourself in recovery?
Yeah, so I would say, like, you know, a lot of people in recovery, I hear their story, and there's like this significant trauma, this significant moment in their life where things kind of changed, and I don't think that was necessarily my story. It was just like there were a lot of little changes in a short amount of time. And when alcohol found me, like all those things were peaking, you know, and alcohol was my way out of that.
Yeah.
But so I was born in the Midwest. I was born and raised in Ohio, and I sort of had like the white picket fence family, you know, like I had all the friends in the backyard. We'd play sports. We'd go to the creek. My grandparents were down the street. Like, as far as like a loving environment goes, like you couldn't really ask for more. And
That's awesome.
yeah, and my dad was kind of a career guy. He worked in corporate America, and once he got his MBA, his work asked him, "Hey, we need you to move for this job." So we picked up and moved to Phoenix, and I think that's where like things started to go a little haywire in my family. So we moved to Phoenix, and my mom never wanted to leave Ohio, and so she built up a lot of resentment towards my dad. But the idea was like, this job's 18 months, we're gonna go right back, and everything will be the way it was. And it just didn't turn out that way, you know, like. Those 18 months go by, they wanted to move somewhere else. We moved somewhere else. And I think as we're moving, like a couple things happened. One, I just got really good at like fitting in, you know, like when you're constantly forced into situations where you're making new friends. I just sort of learned that chameleon behavior that a lot of people talk about. I'd make friends quickly, but I wasn't necessarily authentic in the way I was making those friendships. And then growing up, like my grandpa was my best friend, and he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he died somewhere between the second and third move.
Oh man.
And that, yeah, it just, I mean, it hit me really hard, but I think it was really kind of the final straw for my parents as well. I think my mom always carried this resentment towards my father that we were kind of robbed of those last years with him, with all this moving around. And so our final move was to Wisconsin, and I moved to Wisconsin 3 weeks before summer break, and I was in eighth grade. So I have like 3 weeks of middle school, summer break, and then I start high school. And it was the first time I didn't make friends very easily.
Mm.
There were a lot of like established friend groups. It was a little bit harder to break into those.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time I kind of felt like isolated.
Mm.
And so again, like I just kind of learned how to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
I played sports. I met some people that way. But I just always felt like an outsider. I was around all these kids that they'd grown up together. They had all these stories, and it's like whenever those stories come up, I'm not a part of them. I don't have this history with everybody,
Yeah.
um, and so at home, my mom and dad aren't really talking. They're at odds. Like
Mm.
I have friends, but I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. And like
Mm-hmm.
I'm 15 or 16, and somebody offers me vodka, and
Uh-oh.
yeah, it's like just like kids do. Like we each had a water
Mm-hmm.
bottle of vodka, and I just remember like everybody else was kind of like sipping it, seeing what would happen,
Oh
sipping it,
no.
and I was just like,
Chug it.
I sipped it, I felt that first buzz, and then it was
Mm.
like down the hatch,
Oh
um,
no.
and I blacked out, and I threw up in the head of the PTA's lawn, and got suspended from sports and school, and like it was this whole ordeal. But I couldn't
Whoa.
wait. I couldn't wait to do it again. I was just like, this was it.
Uh-huh.
And so I became kind of like this binge party drinker on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't think much of it. Like I knew I drank more than most people
Mm-hmm.
when I was drinking, but I knew not to drink during the week. I got decent grades. Like
Mm-hmm.
I went to school. So I went on to college, and maybe I start drinking Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then
Oh.
Sunday. And it's just like I'm still able to hold my life together, but I'm in complete denial about like how often I'm blacking out. And
Mm-hmm.
um, as happens for most of us, like starts as fun, and then it becomes like
Mm-hmm.
fun with problems. And I had like a couple minor arrests, and I had just
Mm.
some episodes with girlfriends I wasn't too proud of, and just like my behavior was becoming more erratic.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I feel that.
so I had a couple wake up calls, and so I leave college, and I'm like, okay, I'm starting my career. Like I gotta batten down the hatches, and I did. Like I cut back on the drinking some. I got into my
Hmm.
career. I was a consultant at a big company, and but man, like once I started drinking on the weekends, I still couldn't stop. It was like
Mm-hmm.
I never could have one or two drinks. It was either I had to like abstain completely,
Mm-hmm.
or I was just drinking till I blacked out.
Yep.
And it started to creep back into my life. Like I couldn't
Mm.
sleep after my benders, so I'd have a couple shots to fall asleep, and pretty soon I'm having shots every night to fall asleep. And
Mm-hmm.
I had a girlfriend who became my wife, and so we're dating all during this time, and like
Mm-hmm.
she's just seeing the progression of this.
Oh yeah.
She's seeing me go from like this fun guy to somebody who's really angry all the time, and behind closed doors, just yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I'm either up or I'm really down, and
Yeah.
um, so we ended up moving out to Utah, and I think in my mind it was like, well, I'm gonna get away from a Wisconsin drinking culture. Things
Mm-hmm.
will get better. It didn't get any better. Like I didn't
Mm.
have any friends here. I didn't know anybody, so I found myself on the same couch just drinking more. I just
Oh
sit
man.
at home and just drink. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I was always the guy that like Monday morning I'd wake up and I'd be hungover, and I'd have coffee instead of going to the liquor cabinet. I
Mm-hmm.
still remember the day where I like woke up planning to do that, and instead of going
Oh.
right to the coffee maker, I went to my bar and took a swig of vodka,
Good old hair of the
and
dog.
it fell apart so fast after that.
Mm.
I was drinking around the clock. I just couldn't stop. Like, it was the first time I knew without a doubt I had a serious problem, but
Mm.
I didn't do anything about it. And yeah, it sort of all culminated in me trying to quit.
Mm.
And in that week, like, I relapsed really quickly,
Mm.
locked the bedroom door, told my now ex-wife that I was going to kill
Oh.
myself, and cops came and
Mm.
hauled me off to the psych ward. Um, and so that was kind of my first, like, okay, I've got to get a hold of this. And
Mm.
I wish like the story ended there, but
Yeah.
as is so often, that was just the start, you
Yeah.
know? And
Mm.
yeah, so I got out, I went to AA, I dove right into AA.
Uh-huh.
And I
That's
found
awesome.
myself sober but miserable, like
Mm.
I just hadn't found the right mix of ingredients to keep myself happy, and so it just
Yeah.
felt like a white knuckled sober. It's like I know I can't drink, so I'm not going to
Mm.
drink, but I wish I was drunk. Like every day, I wish I was drunk.
Yep.
And it's funny. It's like I stayed sober for 12 months, but in that 12 months, I lost my job. My wife left me, like lost the
Oh.
house, lost the dog. Like, it's like a bad country song, because I
Oh
was just
no.
so angry.
Yeah.
I wanted so bad to drink, but I couldn't. And like,
Mm.
um, I just hadn't found kind of that inner peace, like
Mm.
when people talk about long-term recovery, you kind of think they're full of shit when you're in it because you're like, no one's actually happy, it's like, it's like, no, this is what it's like you're miserable, but you're
Mm.
sober.
Yeah, yeah.
And, so when she left, like the wheels fell off again.
Mm.
And, you know, I, I didn't try to commit suicide, but I drank like I didn't care if I woke up.
Yep.
I just like popped the top off the liquor bottle and I would just drink and drink and drink. And,
Mm.
it was like, thank God I had those people in AA and people in recovery. I mean, they had to bust down my door several times to haul me to the hospital. And it was
Mm.
like, every time I went to the hospital, I'd have a blood alcohol level between zero point 0.4 and zero point 0.5, and they'd be like,
You
you
should be
should be
dead.
dead, but you're not,
Yep. Mm.
And so this goes on for like a year and a half, and it's the worst time in my
Mm.
life. I think there's
Mm.
no worse place than being stuck in between, like
Mm.
knowing you can't drink, but also just knowing that like without it, you're just miserable. You're just
Mm.
stuck in like this purgatory.
Yeah.
And so the 14th time, I find myself like in the ED. They send me to the ICU to stabilize, and they send me to the detox unit.
Mm.
And I'm in the detox unit, and the psychiatrist comes to recommend rehab. And I'm all ready to tell her no.
Mm.
And I cannot explain this moment to anyone, but something said yes for me. I just like, I don't know. People had always talked to me about surrender, and I
Mm.
never knew what it meant. And people are like, you can't think your way to surrender, you just get there. It's like you can't manufacture it, but like,
Mm.
one day you just give up. And that was that moment for me. Like they asked, and I just found myself saying yes. Like I
Mm.
accepted professional help, and
That's awesome.
everything fell into place that needed to fall into place. I had friends in recovery that recommended the place I'm sitting in right now, and um, I came here and I did 60 days of inpatient rehab. And I remember I came in the first day, and I told him like I can't promise you anything other than I'll do exactly what you tell me to do and I'll give it my all.
Uh-huh.
I was
Yeah.
like, I'm still an angry guy. I still got all these things to work on, but I promise you I'll give you my best.
Mm-hmm.
And I genuinely think I showed up that way. I wasn't
Yeah.
the easiest client, but I gave it my all every day. And I did a step down program. So I went to day treatment for a couple months and I went to IOP for a couple months. And I think where this story starts to like take a really cool turn is, most people get burnt out on
Mm-hmm.
therapy. And I was like 6 or 7 months in, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm still showing up to groups early and like staying late. I'm just like, I love this. Like,
Uh-huh.
I love seeing myself get better. I love seeing
Mm-hmm.
other people get better. Like, I just love this. And so I went and talked to my therapist about it, and she's like, what if you just had the guts to do it? Like your whole life you've like played it safe, you've taken the job that'll pay you the most money, and you're miserable. Like, what if you
Mm-hmm.
just did the job you actually wanted to do? And um, so I was too early in recovery to go work in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually found this autism clinic, and
Ah.
so I went to work with like severely autistic kids. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was like the second day, and one of these kids had had an accident. And I looked
Mm.
to one of the other staff members. I'm like, who cleans this child? And she's like, you do. Like, like I'm like, I don't think you
What?
understand, right? Like, I don't do this,
Uh-huh.
and I tell that story because like I did it, and I was like
Yeah.
humble enough in that moment to do it, and then do it several hundred times after that. And it taught me this lesson in humility that I'd never learned before, and like
Oh.
what it looks like to show up for someone that
Mm.
can't care for themselves, and like show up in a genuine, authentic, loving, caring way. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the hardest job I've ever had. I made
Yeah.
no money, and it was the hardest job I've ever had. Um, and that fueled the fire in me. I'm like, look, I love these kids, but autism isn't my passion. Like
Mm-hmm.
recovery is. And so I made the decision to enroll in school, and so I started an MSW program, and
Oh.
got through my first semester. And second semester you do a practicum. And
Uh-huh.
so I looked up the clinical director from the treatment center I came through.
Uh-huh.
I was like, hey, like I'd love to come for full circle, like I'd love to come back and like be a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
where I came through. And she loved the idea. And I
Mm-hmm.
I started my second semester of school. I started here at Wasatch Recovery, and it was just surreal. Like walking into the
Mm-hmm.
same rooms, I was once like this completely lost person, and
Mm-hmm.
now getting to be on the other side of that, and just like seeing all these people that come in just hopeless, like
Mm-hmm.
they're convinced they're broken, they're convinced that there's no changing their circumstances, they're convinced that they're the worst person to ever walk planet Earth. And
Mm-hmm.
to help them work through those belief systems, and help them work through the trauma, and help them realize what good people they are,
Mm-hmm.
is just such a beautiful thing. It doesn't happen for everyone that way, but
Mm-hmm.
like that moment where you see it click for someone, and like they really start to forgive themselves for the first time is
Uh-huh.
magical. You could offer me like the biggest cash bonus in the world, or like the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to see that light come on in somebody, and like I
Yeah.
take that every time. Like it's a special, special moment. And like getting to be on the other side of that for the past year has just been incredible, and
Yeah.
a lot of people I looked up to when I came through here, it's like I worked side by side with them, and it's like I get to see their humanness now,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I get to see they're people just like me that make mistakes and make good decisions. And it's just been like this surreal experience. And what I've found over the last, it's been close to 3 years that I've been
Mm-hmm.
sober, is I'm not fighting it anymore. It's just like I don't have to feel like I'm waking up every day forcing myself to be sober. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
like I want to be sober. I get to be sober.
Yeah.
Like I own my story now, and when I talk to people, I used to be so ashamed of like, hey, this is
Mm-hmm.
what I've been through. I'm an alcoholic, and now I'm like, I wear it with pride, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
it's been this amazing experience where it's like when you get vulnerable with people and you tell them where you've been, they're like, oh my gosh, me too, or you know, my
Yeah.
sister has this eating disorder, or my uncle suffered with addiction, and
Mm-hmm.
like you realize how close it is to all of us, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
we don't necessarily talk about it day to day, but if you get to know anyone well enough, you know, they've been close to this thing or impacted by this thing in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's been a crazy ride, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just so grateful for what I get to do every day. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. That is way too awesome. I would be
Yeah,
grateful if I were in your shoes too, you know?
yeah,
Because you've actually got my dream job, you know?
yeah, yeah. And it's hard to believe that like as somebody that was as awful a client as I was at times, you know, I'm in a position now where they're like willing to trust me with client care. You know, I like pinch
Yeah.
myself a little bit. I'm just like, wow.
Yeah. It's kind of like, do you
Sometimes I
trust
don't
me?
believe it. Yeah, like why? Why do you trust me? You know, do you know
Yeah,
what
like
I've done?
like
uh,
I was on the other side and now I'm here. You like y'all sure y'all made the right choice? Like I'm supposed to
yeah,
graduate, right? Okay. But
yeah,
that is way too cool of a story, man.
yeah.
You know? And I've just got to say, first of all, congratulations on getting through it. And
Thank you.
congratulations on 3 years. Or going on three, correct?
Yeah, yeah, just about.
Yeah, congratulations, because that is huge. I
Thank
mean,
you.
the first year for me was a big one, but I think the third year was pretty tough too. Year two was all right because it was like, all
Yeah,
right, I got that first year in, so that second year was like, all right, I got this. But year three is kind of where it started to really hit, like, oh yeah, this is real life.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Year three so far seems to be like the year of big decisions, you know? It's like year one is like just stay sober, and year
yep.
two is like, you know, you're doing all these cool things and you're seeing your life like grow in these ways you never thought possible. And year three for me has been like, okay, now this woman I'm dating, am I gonna marry her? Are we gonna have kids? Are we gonna remodel the kid? Like, you know,
Yeah.
it's like, oh my gosh, now I actually make adult decisions again.
Yeah.
So
It's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah,
And uh, you say adult decisions, but at the same time, we've been adults for so long, but it just
yeah.
never really felt like it.
No, no. I yeah, yeah, it's one thing that I learned about myself, you know, is
Okay.
going I think one thing I've learned is like a therapist, right, is that
Hmm.
you know, we are adults in shape and form, you know, but at the end of the day, there's a big part of Blake that's just that kid that's moving around the country against his will. And
Hmm.
every time somebody, you know, says something he doesn't like or tries to get him to do something he doesn't want to do, he
Hmm.
rebels, you know? And so it's like I'm adulting, but it's still, you know, there's a big part of me that's like just a kid trying to figure out how life works and like
Hmm.
trying to make sense of everything. So,
Yeah. And you mentioned how you were able to sit there and look at your coworkers, your colleagues now, and you're able
yeah,
to see them as humans. So I think that would kind of feel like looking up at teachers in like elementary,
yeah,
middle school, high school, you know, just like, or even the high schoolers whenever you're in middle school. It's like they know everything, they know what they're doing, they've got everything figured out. And then come along, and it's like, no, no one really knows what we're doing. We're all just kind of winging it.
yeah, yeah.
And how does it feel like that in recovery over there where you're at? Because I mean, that's got to be you're not necessarily winging it. You're actually following curriculums of sorts, and
Yeah.
you're following like documented things that work for people. So does it feel like imposter syndrome maybe?
All the time,
All the time?
um, at the end of the day, like I'm a person just trying to stay sober, trying
Mm-hmm.
to, do my best to live happy, joyous, and free life.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like, who am I to give this advice, right? Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
about all the times I was given the exact same advice and
You
I,
didn't listen?
I didn't listen. And now I'm on the other side of that and I'm like, just trust me. Like, just
Mm-hmm.
trust me. Just take this advice. And, the one thing that's been so hard for me is like, when I run into that resistance from somebody,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to pull them along. I'm like, come on, you're doing it anyway, like come on,
Yep.
come on. And I often forget how long this process took for me. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
just because you show up in my office or in my group, it
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that you're at that point where you've surrendered. And
Oh no.
I I go back to like what it took for me to finally surrender and
Mm-hmm.
be in a position where I was teachable. It took a lot. It took me
Mm-hmm.
nearly dying several times, and
Mm-hmm.
just because you made it to treatment, it doesn't mean that you're there yet.
Yeah.
And it's hard because you never want to see somebody have to go back out. You never want to see somebody, quote unquote
Mm-hmm.
fail. It's never a failure, but
No.
when somebody relapses, it hurts me just as much as it hurts the clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is hard to try to not force the issue and make
Mm-hmm.
things go the way I want them to. So
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that.
yeah,
And one of the things that you have that I told my therapist whenever I was in rehab that I wish that she had was experience.
yeah,
And that was the biggest thing. I was like, as a therapist, as a person and everything, you are freaking amazing. Like, I've always avoided therapy, but now I love it.
hmm
But I was saying the only thing that they were missing was experience, personal
yeah,
experience with addiction. Because there are some things that addiction will teach you that I don't think a classroom ever could. Do you
yeah,
agree?
yeah. And I think just because I have experience in addiction too, it's like I don't always have experience in what our clients have been through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I look at like my story and how I ended up in my addiction.
Mm-hmm.
But right now I'm working with a mother and her daughter OD'd 10 years ago. And her life, she was a social drinker and
Mm-hmm.
nobody taught her how to work through that. And she
Mm-hmm.
found her she found herself coping with alcohol. And while
Mm-hmm.
I can relate to her when it comes to addiction, I don't have
Mm-hmm.
personal experience losing a child.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah, yeah.
empathize with you. I can come as close as I possibly can, but I,
Mm-hmm.
I can't I can't look you in the eyes and tell you I've experienced what I've experienced.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found is, that like we're all doing the best that we can.
Mm-hmm.
No one's going to have our same story. You hear this
Mm-hmm.
in the rooms of recovery all the time. Like, look for the similarities and not the differences. And you're always going to
Mm-hmm.
find the unique parts of your story. And there's parts of your story no one else can imagine going through.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we've all come to a common solution. And and so it's like your process of grieving, your process of working through what you need to work through, that's going
Mm-hmm.
to be really personal to you.
Yeah.
But the end result kind of looks the same for everyone. You've got unique
Mm-hmm.
parts of your program, I've got unique parts of mine, but
Uh-huh.
ultimately, we've made the same decision in our lives. We try to
Mm-hmm.
act in a certain way every day that keeps us sober, and you
Uh-huh.
know, there are things that work for millions of us across the country, and
Mm-hmm.
the reason is simply because they do work. And
Yeah.
most of us want to create our own path. We think we're smarter than everyone else, but it's like these things work for a reason. It's the
Yep.
reason everybody recommends you do them.
Yeah. That is true. I mean, I know in my personal experiences, I tried my own. It wasn't recovery. It was like a managed slash abstinence
Yeah,
program. And like I would put it down for a little bit. I think I could, the longest I went was like a month, but that was because my femur was broken. So I couldn't get
yeah,
up to get anything. But you
yeah,
know where I went whenever I first got in my car.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but it is one of those things that every experience builds up a
yeah,
little level of something, and we're able to reach back and pull from that experience to help the next person. And
yeah,
that's what you're doing. And even
yeah,
if you haven't been able to experience the exact same story or situations or anything like that, I think
yeah,
one of the things that we get in the rooms is empathy, or at least
yeah,
learning how to strengthen our empathy with others. Because, like you
yeah,
were saying, we get to sit there and listen for the similarities, and we don't necessarily need to focus on the differences. But I think that that's what keeps a lot of people from, or rather myself, from getting into recovery in the first place, you know?
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think along the line somewhere we've learned that people won't listen or people won't care. You know,
hmm
they don't care what our story is. And
yeah.
I view that as a huge part of my job is to disprove that, you know.
How
If
do you do that?
um, you know, I usually in my first two sessions with a client, I
hmm
just listen, you know.
mm
And the reason I just listen is one, like I truly want to understand, you know, and like um, I don't need to ask a lot of questions. Like I want you to know that like I'm just here to listen to you, right? Like
mm
so many people have come into your life and told you how to feel, the way to manage those feelings, and I'm here to like open up a completely non-judgmental space for you to just unload, you know, because like that shit's been in there for a really long time, you know. So it doesn't
mm
matter to me if it makes sense. It doesn't matter to me, you know, how it comes out. If you're
uh
angry, if you're sad, if you're any of those things, right? Just let it out, you
hmm
know, and then we can
Yeah.
start to process through them, you know. But we're all like a pressure cooker, you know, ready to explode, and it's like first we just got to release the pressure valve, you know,
Oh
and
yeah.
um, so I that's kind of my approach to it is just like, look, like whatever you say, I'm gonna listen, you know,
Mm.
and I'm not gonna try to correct you. I'm not gonna tell you how to think differently. I'm just gonna sit here and listen to you, you know.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think that that really does encapsulate the whole fact that everyone just wants to be heard.
Yeah,
And that is kind of what I was hearing in your story too, was that
yeah,
you were just wanting to be heard. You were wanting to be
yeah,
seen, you know?
yeah,
And it's difficult whenever you can't break from that mold, especially whenever you
yeah,
don't have any control over situations.
yeah,
And that's a huge power that's a huge lesson in powerlessness right there.
yeah. You know, I probably failed to mention this, but um, my parents, when I was born, you know, my parents were
hmm
not married. They'd been dating for like a month or two, something like that.
Ah.
And then my mom finds out she's pregnant, and my
Oh.
dad had been abandoned as a child. So he's like, I'm
Mm.
not letting that kid grow up without a dad. So my dad
Yeah.
did like the noble thing, and he's like, I'm going to marry you. Like, we're going to make this work for the kid. The
Mm.
best intentions ever, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when mom and dad fight, you know, that kid's like, well, if I didn't come along, right? Like if it
hmm
weren't for me, none of this would be happening. Like they
Yeah.
would have found partners that make them happy.
Mm.
And so what I end up doing is playing the role of peacemaker in my house
Oh
rather than
yeah.
saying like, hey, I'm a kid and here are my needs, you know?
hmm
And again, that's nobody's fault. That's not my parents' fault. They had good intentions. As a
Yeah.
kid, I had the best of intentions, and yet I didn't learn how to like express my needs. And that's
hmm
so many of our stories, right? It's like none of us wake up one day and we're like, I'm going to be the person that never expresses how they feel, and I'm going to be angry at the world, and I'm going to drink myself to death. Like, it's just like life throws us these curveballs, and we adapt to them, and some adaptations take us in a direction we wish they wouldn't.
Yeah.
That's
Good or
it.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't make you a bad person. Just means that like it was the best you could do in that moment. And it had some bad effects on your outcome.
Yeah. And you highlight something really important too, and that's the whole fact that it really can just start really small. And it will sit there, it'll start small, and it'll start rolling downhill and picking things up either really quickly, or people will come along, pick it up, and add stuff to it.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's nothing that I could ever do to play catch up fast enough to catch up with any problems. Like as soon as I was like, all right, I'm addressed that issue, I had 2 more hit me before that one was over with. And so it was like I could never win,
Yeah.
So how did you deal with that kind of feeling? Because you had to grow up way too early, right?
Yeah.
And be peacemaker. So you had to do too much as a kid. So you really didn't start off with like an ice cube.
Yeah.
You started off with like an igloo rolling downhill.
Yeah.
And that's rough.
And I think that's all the things I had to work through in therapy and support groups is, again, like my parents did what they thought was best. So they grew up in a zero structure environment. So what do they do with their kid? They put them in an extremely structured environment, and I felt repressed, and so I rebelled. And it's like my dad did the opposite, right? Like he grew up without any structure, and so he's craving it, and he puts probably too much structure in his life, right? And so what I had to unlearn was those behaviors, right? Structure's not necessarily a bad thing, like when your girlfriend asks you to like put together a budget or a schedule, like it's okay, like but you have to just like, I hate to use the word trigger, but it is, right? It's like there's these tiny things in life that like we were taught to avoid or to repress or whatever, and the smallest thing can trigger that in us, and the next thing we know, we're like blowing up our lives, and so I had to kind of figure out how to pull the pin out of the grenade for those triggers, and just like a lot of that for me has been putting that structure in my life, hating every minute of it and doing it anyway, and I still fight it, and I'll probably fight it till the day I die, but I know it's good for me. Like I know this is how I grow, is to do the opposite of what I've been pushing against my entire life, and I also got to have fun. To your point, I grew up too fast, and so like now as an adult, I got to go rock climb, I got to go ski, I got to just like go have fun sometimes and know that that's okay.
Yeah. I was just about to say that you're about to have to work a paradoxical kind of recovery, because you've got to set that structure of adulthood, and then you've got to allow time for kid time,
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Because I know for some people like myself, I thrive in structure if I get to choose the structure.
Yes. Yes.
If I don't get to choose the structure, I will upend it. I will fight it. But I thrive in it. So how do you end up dealing with your structured schedules of sorts?
So I mentioned, I did AA for a long time, and steps 2 and 3 are like the God steps, and they're the ones that trip me up every time. And it finally like dawned on me that when everybody was sharing about God, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had a different version of God. No two
Uh-huh.
gods were the same. And so I'm like, maybe this thing isn't about God, you know?
Uh-huh.
Maybe what it's telling me is that like this is all about control, right? When I get
Ooh.
things my way,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
And when anybody presents me with something that isn't my way,
Mm-hmm.
I try to force things to be my way, And
Oh
so
yeah.
maybe, right, the second and third steps are just
Mm-hmm.
telling me to accept what life gives me, right? Like life's going to give me this. And my job's to adapt to it, not
Mm-hmm.
try to force it to go any one way. Because when I
Yeah.
try to force life to go my way and my structure and like, it doesn't go that well for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that's the back and forth in my head is like,
Mm-hmm.
I'll spend a week or two trying to get my way. I'll
Uh-huh.
get really, really frustrated. And then I'll have to go back to this concept of acceptance. I
Oh
just
yeah.
accept what life has given me and just do my
Mm-hmm.
best with it. And the next thing life gives me, like, do my best with it. And
Yeah.
when I do that, life's a lot easier. But it's a given, we never just like heal from these things, right? It's like a
Mm-hmm.
constant back and forth, and we're always
Mm-hmm.
learning, and we're
Yeah,
always
yeah.
taking small steps back and steps forward. And
Mm-hmm.
I've learned to be okay with that and not beat myself up when, I do take a step back or I find myself trying to control everything.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that. That is a great way to look at, well, recovery and the 12 steps,
yeah,
because that's a great way to break it down for someone that may be against the 12 steps, because I know
yeah,
I was so against the 12 steps.
yeah,
You couldn't get me into a 12-step room at all.
yeah,
But what was funny is that whenever I actually got back to my storage unit back home after I got out of rehab, there was
yeah,
an AA book in my storage unit that I hadn't been in for a year,
yeah,
and so I was like, where the hell did this come from? So
yeah,
someone was trying to get me into recovery before, and I just
yeah,
was not having it.
yeah.
Um, but whenever you're dealing with your step work, you mentioned step 2 and 3, so you get tripped up on those. But which
hmm
one is your favorite if you had to choose one?
I mean, based on where I work, I'd say step 12, like
Yeah, yeah.
I love helping other people in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
But I think probably the most growth for me
Mm-hmm.
came in the amends process.
Oh yeah.
And I'll tell you a story about that. So I had made most of my amends,
Mm-hmm.
but the one I had gone back and forth with my sponsor on was my ex-wife's family. So I
That's a hard
mentioned
one.
like I didn't know how they felt towards me. She
Mm-hmm.
and I were cordial, and
Mm-hmm.
I felt I had made amends to her, but her family, I was like, I don't know, like
Mm-hmm.
based on how I treated my ex, like how do they possibly feel about me? And so my sponsor and I agreed to just kind of let that be.
Yeah.
Um, Fast forward, and about 2 months ago, I do a
Oh.
podcast for the first time, and I posted on my Instagram, my Facebook, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
getting so many messages from people I didn't expect. And then on my birthday, so my birthday was February 4th.
Happy
I'm
belated birthday.
Thank you. I'm getting ready for my girlfriend to come home,
Uh-huh.
and all of a sudden I get a text about this long, and it's from my ex-wife's mom and dad.
Oh
And
boy.
I
Oh
get
boy.
choked up just like thinking about this.
Uh-huh.
But they basically said in their text that they had both taken time to sit down and listen to my podcast together,
Mm-hmm.
and just that they could just hear this change in my voice, um, and just the way I was able to carry myself, and just how they could see the positive changes that I was making, and how proud of me they were,
Mm-hmm.
how proud of me they were for what I was doing with my life now. And in that, they also told me that they were never angry with me. They told me that
Mm.
we were hurt, and
Uh-huh.
we were scared you were going to die, But they were never angry with me. They just wanted to see me get better. And I realized in that moment, amends look like a million different forms, but they take place in a lot of different ways, but like God or a higher power, whatever you want to call it, like it knew it was time, and it like got that podcast to them and they heard it. And, I think they heard things from me they probably needed to hear. And then I got to hear things from them that I needed to hear. And, it was like, I didn't need it, but my God, did it feel good, just to like, have that moment and just like, know that I was able to kind of give them the story and make that amends to them and have them, kind of come back with so much love. It was an amazing experience I just had. So,
that is way too cool. And that's pretty recent too.
Yeah. My girlfriend was taking me to dinner. Like she came home and I'm sitting there just like sobbing and she's like, who died? And I'm like, nobody died. I'm really overwhelmed and really happy right now, Yeah. But that's what sobriety's given me, just like things I never thought I'd ever have the chance to make right. And it's just like, when I do the right thing long enough, like life has a way of working out.
Yeah. It's very strange how life does do that, and it's how God, higher power, or whatever it is you may want to call it, how everything will just get orchestrated in such a fashion that it even says it in the big book that we couldn't have ever planned it that way, even if we tried, you know. And so it kind of makes me a little scary. Not makes me a little scary. It makes me a little scared of what could happen in the future, but looking at all the past experiences, it's like, hey, there's nothing to really be afraid of. It's just that silly imagination talking to you.
Yeah.
So, whenever you're dealing with yourself being in where you're at right now, just you're you in recovery, and how do you picture yourself being in a couple years? Because it's kind of hard to really like see yourself out of addiction. And so being in recovery, there's a weird, to me, it feels like a weird bubble, of sorts. But where do you see yourself in a few years while being in recovery? Because you're already doing my dream job. So I see myself being where you are in a few years. But where do you see yourself? Maybe you're running the recovery center.
Yeah. I love this question because I debate this all the time, So my favorite cop out is like my girlfriend will be like, what do you think about having kids? And I'm like, well, I live one day at a time. So I can't tell you like how I'm going to feel about that tomorrow, And it's like, I don't, I'm human, like I think about the future all the time, but whenever I want a built-in excuse to not do something, it's like, that's my favorite one to go to. But the truth is, like,
that's good.
I think what I've learned over time is that, like, I need to set a direction and things will take me where they're supposed to take me. I look at like my clinical director's job and I'm like, hey, like that looks really appealing to me someday, there's so much responsibility that comes with managing people. And here we've got 3 different phases of care that she's over and a sober living. And I mean, there's so much that goes into managing it. And I think, like, I know that's the direction I want to have. But I think what my program does, it allows me to stay humble enough to be like, I'm not there yet, I don't know if it'll be 3 years. I don't know if it'll be 5 years, but I know that's the direction I want to head in. And I just need to not put a timeline on it. Because the minute I come up with like, well, in 3 years, I'm going to be this, I start managing to the timeline and it goes horribly. And so that's what I try to do is just like set a direction, And so For me, that looks like, I probably do want to be like a clinical director in a treatment center at some point.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, I'd love to like work into that, my own nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest issues we're facing today in the state of Utah is I'm at an insurance-based treatment program.
Mm-hmm.
Methamphetamine is running through Utah, and
Mm.
unfortunately, meth today puts people into a level of psychosis where it takes months for their brain to sort of stabilize and normalize, and
Oh
insurance
man.
doesn't meet that timeline, and
Mm.
so I would love to have a nonprofit specifically for people suffering from methamphetamine
Mm-hmm.
addiction that provides them funds for sober living so they can stay in a program long enough for them to recover. Um, there's a lot of tragic drugs out
Mm-hmm.
there,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't see as many fentanyl clients because they die
Mm-hmm.
before they get here. It's tragic, but
Yeah.
what,
Yeah.
meth doesn't kill as many people, but what it does to the brain is horrible. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to get into that field and do something for that population. And then personally, I'd love to get married and probably have kids. I think I'm finally getting over my fear. And if my girlfriend hears this, she'll be like, "Oh, you've made a decision you want kids because you've been stalling for a year, But I do
uh,
think that's what I want, It's just like I have this
mm-hmm.
fear, and I have this
Mm-hmm.
fear that what if one day I relapse, Like
Mm-hmm.
what if I screw up my kids? And it's
Mm.
taken me a while to get over that fear,
Yeah.
But I think I'm getting there. So
Yeah, sure sounds like it. And that is an amazing dream to have. And you put
yeah,
it so well because if you put it in that time frame, I know I would start to sit there and try to micromanage everything.
yeah,
But in recovery, it's just taught me that I just need to have an idea. I don't need
yeah,
to have a definite thing. I need to have a general idea and go that way, and somehow it works out.
yeah,
It's the strangest
yeah.
thing. But you have to do the next right thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. I tell people when I tell my story, I think one of the things I tell them about my life today is just to, like
Mm-hmm.
everything I have is not the result of like some brilliant idea Blake had. Before I got sober, I used to think like I made everything in my life happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is like I got where I got to by just listening to people that had been there before me. That was
Mm-hmm.
the mindset shift that happened when I entered into treatment. I was
Mm-hmm.
willing to listen to people who had done this before, and I followed in their footsteps. And
Mm-hmm.
I was humble enough to not try to do it my own way. And to your point, like if I had laid out my life the first day of treatment or even
Mm-hmm.
90 days into treatment, it would have looked a tenth of what my life is today. Because of the influence other people have had on me, my ability to listen to those people, that's what
Mm-hmm.
makes my life what it is today. It's not because I've had like this brilliant, idea or this epiphany. It's like I just simply listen to people and I'm willing to do what they've done. And
Yeah.
it's amazing. It sounds so simple, but it's so hard to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
fought it for years.
Yeah. That is very well put. And I love that you've really encapsulated surrender in
Yeah,
that because ultimately that's what it falls back to. I think recovery and addiction is this one weird big cycle.
yeah,
One aspect of addiction and recovery will feed back to the other one, and vice versa. And it's really all about connecting the dots and seeing how many dots you can really connect, right?
yeah,
But I do hate this because we are getting close to the end of this episode.
yeah,
First, I have a question. Could
yeah,
we expect to see you on the show in the near future?
yeah. I'd love to come back.
Sweet.
Yeah,
Because I know we got your story, but we
yeah,
need people in recovery, talking about their story. And, I mean, you're a therapist, so who
yeah,
better to talk recovery with than a therapist?
yeah. Yeah, and whenever you put this, I mean, I always tell people like, reach out. I'm available.
Mm-hmm.
Call me, text me. Like, we all do this together, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
part of me coming on here is just that, like, if the one person who hears it that needs to hear it and like finds the person they connect with, like, that's what this is all about. It's why you do
Mm-hmm.
this. It's why I do this. Like, you know,
Yep.
we all need that person, and I
Mm-hmm.
found that person for me, you know, and
Yeah.
hopefully for someone out there, you know, one of your guests can be that resource, you know?
Yeah. That's for sure. And speaking of resources, do you have any that you would like to give a shout out?
Yes. So when I came to Wasatch, there's a guy here. His name's Todd Sylvester,
Mm-hmm.
and he's been in the world of recovery for 31 years, 31 years sober. He's taken he's really taken me under his wing, and
Mm-hmm.
he's really taught me how to rework my belief systems around myself. He's really taught me how to love myself again.
Mm-hmm.
So many amazing things. And so he's got a podcast called Todd Inspires, and I would just encourage people to check it out. You know,
Sweet.
he talks to a lot of people in addiction, and I think the guests he brings on and just Todd himself are resources so many people need, you know, because so many
Mm-hmm.
of us just think we're a piece of shit, and we just need to hear that, like, we're not, you know, like, we're
Mm-hmm.
really not. We're just
Yep.
people that made mistakes, and he helped me see that. So I think he's a great resource.
That is way too awesome. Thank you for giving
Yeah,
that shout out because that is one that I didn't know, and that's one that I'm definitely going to be diving into myself.
yeah, yeah. Todd's amazing.
That's good to know. And I have one last question for you, though.
Yeah,
There is a number that someone can call if they are having a mental health crisis. Do you know that number?
I do not.
It's
Off
above
the
my
top,
head if you can see it.
I
It's like
can't.
somewhere. It's 988.
988. I was
Yes.
gonna say 911. Yeah,
Yeah, you can too, but that one might not go as well.
yeah. 988.
Yep. So if we can teach our children how to dial 911 in case of an emergency, why can't we teach our friends and loved ones how to dial 988 in case of a mental health crisis? And that can be used for if you just got laid off a job, if you just had a bad breakup, or if you got to be on your report card, you know? So
Yeah,
it can literally be used for anything. And Blake, I've just got to say thank you for being on the
yeah.
show. And
Thank
thank you for
you.
being in recovery. And congratulations on your recovery, too.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me on and what you do. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. And everyone out there, thank you for listening to Retrieving Sanity on WDJY 99.1 FM. And as always, just be kind to each other and love each other. It's not that hard. So until next time, y'all have a good one. All right, that was Blake as he told us about his decade-long addiction. So be sure to check us out next week as we speak to Dr. Fred Moss as we uncover what it's like to maybe not actually have a diagnosis as we speak to the undoctor. So thank you again for listening on WDJY 99.1 FM, and as always, much love and see you next week. Shalom.